The late afternoon sun filtered through the sheer curtains of my parents' living room in Louisville, Kentucky, casting long shadows across the hardwood floors that had witnessed countless family gatherings throughout my childhood. This particular Sunday, however, felt markedly different from all those pleasant memories. The air itself seemed to carry an electric charge of tension, thick enough that I could almost taste it on my tongue as I stood facing my father, whose expression had hardened into something I'd seen far too many times before, profound disappointment mixed with barely restrained anger. "You're just so jealous of your sister," he said, each word dropping like a stone into still water, creating ripples of hurt that spread outward through my chest. "That's what this is really about, isn't it?" I gripped my phone with such force that my knuckles blanched white against my skin, a physical manifestation of the emotional control I was desperately trying to maintain. Across the room, my mother released a sharp laugh from her position on the cream-colored leather couch, a sound devoid of any genuine humor, cutting through the charged atmosphere like shattered glass scattering across tile. She exchanged a knowing glance with my father and shook her head slowly, her expression suggesting she was observing a petulant child throwing an unreasonable tantrum over being denied dessert, rather than her adult daughter attempting to establish necessary boundaries. "I'm not going to the wedding," I repeated for what felt like the 100th time that afternoon, working to keep my voice steady and measured despite the anger that bubbled and churned beneath the surface, like a pot about to boil over. "I have my reasons, and they're valid ones." My father crossed his arms over his chest in that characteristic gesture of paternal authority I'd witnessed throughout my entire life, his face already beginning to flush, that familiar shade of crimson that always appeared whenever I failed to meet his expectations or disappointed him in some fundamental way. The vein at his temple, which I'd learned to recognize as a barometer of his anger since childhood, began to pulse visibly. "Your reasons?" he said, his voice rising slightly in volume and intensity. "What reasons could you possibly have that would justify this behavior? Your sister is getting married, Erica. Family shows up for each other during important moments. That's what family does. That's what truly matters in this life." The profound irony of his words nearly provoked an inappropriate laugh from deep within my chest, but I managed to swallow it down along with all the bitter, cutting responses that fought desperately to escape from my throat. Instead, I took a measured breath and reminded myself of who I was and what I'd accomplished despite their consistent lack of support. "My name is Erica Morrison. I'm 28 years old, and I work as a senior event coordinator for Bright Fen Wealth Management, a respected mid-sized financial planning company here in Louisville. Over the past 6 years, I've dedicated myself to building a career that fills me with genuine pride and satisfaction. I spend my days organizing corporate conferences, planning elaborate retirement celebrations, coordinating company retreats, and creating memorable celebration dinners that bring people together during the moments that matter most in their professional and personal lives. I understand, perhaps better than most people in this world, what it truly means to show up for someone you care about. I've witnessed firsthand the joy that spreads across people's faces when they realize that others have taken the time and effort to celebrate their achievements and milestones. I've seen grown men cry tears of gratitude when their colleagues surprise them with thoughtful retirement parties. I've watched families embrace each other with overwhelming emotion during anniversary celebrations that I've meticulously planned down to the smallest detail. More significantly, I know with painful clarity exactly what it costs emotionally when the people who should care about you most choose not to show up at all. My sister's name is Brooke Morrison. She's 25 years old, works part-time at an upscale boutique in downtown Louisville, and has occupied the position of golden child in our family for as long as my memory extends backward. Everything she touches seems to transform into pure magic in my parents' eyes, as if she possesses some mystical Midas touch that turns ordinary accomplishments into extraordinary achievements worthy of endless celebration and praise. Every accomplishment of hers, no matter how small or insignificant, receives treatment as though she's won an Olympic gold medal or discovered the cure for a devastating disease. Every setback she experiences gets cushioned with endless emotional support, financial assistance, and understanding that flows freely and abundantly from our parents' seemingly limitless reserves of patience and compassion. Reserves that somehow never quite extended to me with the same generosity or consistency. When Brooke announced her engagement to Tyler Richardson 3 months ago, my parents reacted as though she'd been crowned royalty or selected for some incredibly prestigious honor that would bring glory to our entire family name. They immediately threw her an elaborate engagement party at their exclusive country club, complete with ice sculptures, a live band, and catering from the most expensive restaurant in the city. They helped her book the grand ballroom at the Seelbach Hotel, arguably the most expensive and sought-after wedding venue in all of Louisville, without even blinking at the astronomical cost. They paid for her custom-designed wedding dress from a renowned bridal boutique without a single question about the price tag, and they posted about her engagement constantly on every social media platform they could access. Every single day seemed to bring a new photograph, a new update, a new effusive celebration of Brooke's perfect life and perfect engagement and perfect upcoming wedding and perfect future with Tyler. My mother's Facebook feed became essentially a shrine to Brooke's impending nuptials, with multiple posts daily about dress fittings, venue tours, cake tastings, and flower selections. My father, who had never been particularly active on social media before, suddenly became an enthusiastic participant in documenting every minute detail of the wedding planning process. I smiled through all of it with practiced grace, carefully liking the appropriate posts and leaving enthusiastic comments that struck just the right tone of sisterly support and genuine happiness, even though my chest felt progressively tighter with each new announcement. Every notification about another wedding-related update made my heart constrict painfully, but I maintained my facade of supportive older sister because that was what good daughters and sisters were supposed to do in these situations. But here's what my family seemed to have conveniently forgotten, or perhaps more accurately, what they'd deliberately chosen to erase from their selective memory. 8 months ago, I got married too. My wedding was admittedly smaller in scale than Brooke's elaborate affair would be, more intimate and personal rather than grand and showy, but it was profoundly meaningful to me in every possible way. I married Owen Fletcher, a kind and steady man who works as an architect at Morrison & Associates, a respected firm downtown. We'd been together for 4 years before his proposal, carefully and intentionally building a life together and a partnership that felt solid and real and sustainable, rather than flashy or performative. When Owen proposed to me on a quiet spring evening in Cherokee Park, our favorite place to walk and talk and dream about our future together, I felt like the luckiest woman alive. He'd planned everything so thoughtfully, arranging for a photographer to capture the moment without my knowledge, bringing along a picnic basket filled with all my favorite foods, and choosing the exact spot where we'd had our first real conversation about building a life together years earlier. I sent out wedding invitations to my family members 6 full weeks in advance, providing them with more than adequate time to make whatever arrangements they might need for travel, time off work, or any other logistics. I didn't just drop the invitations in the mail and hope for the best. I called my parents personally on a Sunday afternoon when I knew they'd both be home to make absolutely certain they'd received their invitations, to confirm they had the correct date and time clearly marked on their calendars, and to answer any questions they might have had about the venue, the dress code, or any other details. I even offered to help coordinate travel arrangements if they needed any assistance. Despite the fact that they lived only 30 minutes away from the beautiful garden venue I'd chosen after months of careful research and consideration, I wanted to make attending my wedding as easy and convenient as possible for them, removing any potential obstacles or excuses that might prevent them from being there on my special day. Nobody came. Not my parents, despite their promises and assurances that they wouldn't miss it for the world. Not my sister, despite the handwritten note I'd included in her invitation, telling her how much it would mean to have her standing beside me. Not my Aunt Caroline or my Uncle Robert, or my cousins Jennifer and Michael or anyone else from my side of the family who had received invitations and verbally confirmed their attendance. On the day I married the man I loved more than anything in this world, I stood at that altar with Owen's family filling every single seat on his side of the aisle, his parents beaming with joy, his siblings and their spouses dressed in their finest clothes, his grandmother dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, his cousins and aunts and uncles creating a warm, supportive presence that should have been mirrored on my side. But my side of the aisle presented a haunting, devastating, utterly humiliating emptiness that no amount of strategic flower arrangements or creative lighting could disguise or diminish. My best friend Kelsey Chen sat alone in the front row on my side, bless her heart, trying her absolute best to make the emptiness look less pathetic and obvious by spreading out her belongings across multiple seats and moving around strategically between different chairs during the photographer's attempts to capture the ceremony. But nothing could hide the fundamental truth that was painfully visible to every single person in attendance. My family had chosen not to be there. I smiled through the entire ceremony with a brightness that felt like it might crack my face in half, held Owen's hands tightly as we exchanged our carefully written vows, danced at the reception with all the joy and enthusiasm I could possibly muster, and pretended with every ounce of strength I possessed that my heart wasn't breaking into progressively smaller pieces, with each glance at those empty chairs that represented my family's absence. The photographer, a kind woman named Sandra who had come highly recommended, tried her best to work around the obvious imbalance. She suggested creative angles and groupings, took beautiful close-up shots of Owen and me, and captured genuinely lovely moments throughout the day. But when it came time for the traditional family photos, the ones that usually take up entire pages in wedding albums, there was an awkward, painful conversation where I had to explain that there would be no photos with my parents, no shots with my sister, no extended family groupings from my side. Sandra's eyes had filled with sympathy and something that looked like barely concealed anger on my behalf, but she'd simply nodded professionally and suggested we focus on capturing beautiful portraits of Owen and me instead. The resulting wedding album, while objectively beautiful, tells a story that's impossible to miss. A bride who was apparently born without a family, who emerged fully formed into the world with no parents or siblings or relatives to celebrate her union. In the days and weeks that followed my wedding, my family acted as though absolutely nothing unusual or hurtful had happened. Their behavior suggested that skipping my wedding was such an inconsequential event that it didn't even warrant acknowledgement, much less apology or explanation. My mother called me exactly 1 week after my wedding, her tone casual and light and completely unchanged from any other ordinary phone conversation we'd ever had, as if she hadn't just deliberately skipped the most important day of my entire life. She asked how I was doing, chatted about the weather and her garden and some new restaurant she'd tried downtown, and mentioned that she'd bought new curtains for the guest bedroom, all delivered in the same pleasant, conversational tone she might use to discuss her grocery shopping list. When I finally worked up the courage to bring up the wedding, carefully and gently because I was still desperately trying not to rock the boat or cause family conflict, she sighed heavily in a way that suggested I was being tiresome and unreasonable. Her explanation, delivered in a tone that brooked no argument or further discussion, was that she'd been busy with a critical work project that absolutely couldn't be postponed under any circumstances. My mother works as an administrative assistant at a local insurance company, a job she's held for over 20 years and one that has never, in all that time, required her to work weekends or miss important family events. the sudden emergence of this supposedly unmissable work project on the exact day of my wedding struck me as remarkably convenient timing. But I didn't push the issue because I was still holding on to some desperate hope that there might be a legitimate explanation I wasn't seeing. My father's excuse followed a similar pattern of convenient implausibility. He claimed he'd had a critical work conflict he absolutely couldn't get out of, something about a presentation that had supposedly been scheduled months in advance and couldn't possibly be rescheduled under any circumstances. He worked as a sales manager for a manufacturing company, a position that certainly came with responsibilities and obligations, but also one that had historically allowed him considerable flexibility in managing his schedule. The idea that he couldn't rearrange or delegate a presentation in order to attend his own daughter's wedding seemed almost deliberately insulting, but he delivered this explanation with such conviction and finality that questioning it felt like accusing him of lying, something that would only make me look like the unreasonable, difficult daughter in their narrative. Brooke's response to missing my wedding was perhaps the most painful of all, precisely because there was no response whatsoever. She never acknowledged that my wedding had happened at all. She didn't call to apologize or offer any explanation for her absence. She didn't send a card or a gift or even a brief text message offering congratulations or regrets about missing the ceremony. She simply continued posting pictures of her own life on Instagram and Facebook as though my wedding had never existed in the first place. Photos of her morning coffee, her outfits, her brunches with friends, her shopping trips, her date nights with Tyler. Her social media presence continued uninterrupted and unchanged, a stream of carefully curated images that painted a picture of her perfect, enviable life while completely erasing any acknowledgement of mine. I tried desperately to let it go. I told myself repeatedly, like a mantra I hoped would eventually take hold, that people make mistakes and that maybe they genuinely didn't realize how much their absence had hurt me. I constructed elaborate scenarios in my mind where there were legitimate reasons I didn't fully understand, where some complex set of circumstances had prevented them all from attending, where their absence was the result of unfortunate timing rather than deliberate choice. But the pain lingered stubbornly, like a wound that wouldn't properly heal no matter how much time passed or how many excuses I made on their behalf. It was a dull, persistent ache that never quite went away, coloring every interaction I had with them afterward with an undercurrent of hurt and resentment I couldn't fully suppress. Every time I saw them at Sunday dinners or holiday gatherings, sitting around the table making small talk and laughing at jokes and acting like everything was perfectly normal, I felt the weight of those empty chairs pressing down on my chest, making it difficult to breathe normally or participate naturally in the conversation. Every single time Brooke mentioned her upcoming wedding or showed us another detail she'd planned, the flowers she'd selected, the menu she'd finalized, the favors she'd ordered, I had to physically bite my tongue to keep from screaming at all of them about the hypocrisy and unfairness of the situation. The truth about what really happened came to light approximately 3 weeks before my wedding, though I didn't discover it until several weeks afterward. The discovery came about almost accidentally through a combination of technological access and desperate need for answers that drove me to look for evidence I wasn't even sure existed. My parents had installed a comprehensive home security camera system about a year before my wedding, motivated by a string of break-ins that had occurred in their upscale neighborhood and had left many residents feeling vulnerable and anxious about their safety. The system was quite sophisticated, with cameras covering the front door, back door, driveway, and several interior spaces, including the kitchen and main hallway. I still had complete access to this security system because I'd been the one to help my father set it up initially. He'd been completely overwhelmed by the technology and the various apps and settings, so I'd spent an entire afternoon walking him through the process, creating accounts, downloading apps, and making sure he understood how to review footage if needed. He'd given me the login credentials and told me I could check the cameras any time if I ever needed to for any reason, perhaps to verify that a package had been delivered or to check on the house when they were traveling. Several weeks after my wedding, driven by this desperate, consuming need to understand what had happened and why my entire family had failed to show up, I found myself logging into their security system late one night when I couldn't sleep. I told myself I was probably being paranoid and oversensitive, that there had to be some reasonable explanation for why they'd all been absent, that perhaps the invitations had somehow gotten lost in the mail despite my careful tracking and confirmation. Maybe there had been some kind of terrible miscommunication that nobody had bothered to mention to me afterward. Maybe they'd all had some kind of legitimate emergency they were too embarrassed to tell me about. Maybe there was some explanation that would make sense of the hurt and confusion I'd been carrying around, like a weight for weeks. What I found on that security footage made my stomach turn violently and fundamentally changed everything I thought I knew about my family and my place within it. The timestamp on the footage showed a date exactly 3 weeks before my wedding, a sunny Tuesday afternoon when I knew my parents had both been at work, but Brooke had been at their house, apparently stopping by during her lunch break from the boutique where she worked part-time. The camera angle captured the kitchen perfectly, showing Brooke standing casually by the counter in her work clothes, holding what I immediately recognized as my carefully chosen wedding invitation in her hands. I'd spent hours selecting those invitations, choosing elegant cream-colored cardstock with delicate gold lettering, the kind of beautiful, timeless design that Brooke herself had always said she wanted for her own wedding someday. I watched, my heart pounding and my hands shaking as I held my phone, as Brooke opened the invitation slowly and read through it with a slight frown creasing her forehead. Then something happened that made my blood run cold. She laughed. Not a small, polite chuckle or a brief moment of amusement, but a full, genuine, delighted laugh that seemed to bubble up from deep within her chest, the kind of laugh you might release after hearing the funniest joke you'd ever encountered. Her head tilted back, slightly, her mouth open wide, her whole body shaking with mirth at something she'd found apparently hilarious about my wedding invitation. Then, without any hesitation or second thought, she crumpled up my invitation. This invitation I'd so carefully selected and personally addressed and sent with such hope in my heart, and tossed it directly into the trash can sitting beside the counter like it was worthless garbage, no more significant than a piece of junk mail or a used paper towel. But the worst part, the part that made me feel physically ill as I watched, came next. Brooke immediately pulled out her phone and called someone, her voice bright and mocking and crystal clear on the audio recording that accompanied the video footage. "Yeah, Erica's getting married," she said, her tone dripping with derision and contempt. "Can you believe it? She doesn't deserve a real wedding anyway. Who does she think she is, sending out these fancy invitations like she's somebody special? It's honestly pathetic." I saved that footage immediately, my hands trembling so badly I could barely operate my phone properly. I downloaded it to 3 different locations to make absolutely certain I wouldn't lose it: my phone's internal storage, my cloud backup, and a USB drive I kept in my desk drawer. I didn't really know why I was saving it at the time I first watched it. Didn't have any concrete plan for what I might do with this evidence of my sister's cruelty. Maybe some deep, instinctive part of me understood that I would need this proof eventually. Maybe I just desperately wanted evidence that I wasn't losing my mind, that the pain I felt was completely real and entirely justified rather than an overreaction or misinterpretation of innocent events. Maybe I needed to be able to look at it whenever I started doubting myself, whenever I wondered if maybe I was being too sensitive about the whole situation like my parents always implied. Over the following months, I watched that footage more times than I could count, each viewing bringing fresh waves of hurt and anger and betrayal. I watched my sister's face light up with cruel amusement as she read my invitation. I listened to her mocking words over and over until they were burned into my memory. I studied every detail of that moment, looking for some sign that I'd misunderstood or misinterpreted what I was seeing, but there was no ambiguity whatsoever. The footage was devastating in its clarity. There was no room for alternative explanations or charitable interpretations. My sister had deliberately thrown away my wedding invitation while laughing about how I didn't deserve happiness, and then my entire family had used various transparent excuses to avoid attending my wedding, leaving me to stand alone at my own altar. Now, standing in my parents' living room 8 months after my wedding as they called me jealous and selfish and dramatic for refusing to attend Brooke's wedding, I realized something that made my stomach turn with a sick, heavy feeling that settled deep in my gut. They genuinely didn't think they'd done anything wrong. In their carefully constructed version of reality, in the narrative they'd apparently all agreed upon and reinforced to each other, Brooke's wedding was a sacred, unmissable event that absolutely required my presence and my support and my enthusiastic participation regardless of how I might feel about the situation. But my wedding had been optional at best, disposable, forgettable, something they could skip without any real consequence or guilt, something that didn't warrant the same level of commitment or consideration. My mother stood up from the couch and walked over to me with slow, deliberate steps, her expression softening into something that might have looked like genuine maternal concern to someone who didn't know her as well as I did after 28 years of being her daughter. She reached out to touch my arm in what I'm sure she thought was a comforting, conciliatory gesture, but I stepped back before her hand could make contact with my skin, maintaining the physical distance that reflected the emotional chasm that had opened between us. "Erica, sweetie," she said in that patronizing tone I'd heard throughout my entire life, the one that made me feel like a difficult child who needed to be carefully managed rather than an adult woman with legitimate grievances. "I know you're upset about something, but you really need to put whatever this is aside for now. This is Brooke's day. She's your little sister. You can't let whatever grudge you're holding on to ruin this special occasion for her. She's so excited about this wedding, and she really wants you there to celebrate with her and share in her happiness." Grudge. That single word hit me harder than I'd expected, landing like a physical blow to my chest, as if the profound hurt I'd carried for 8 months straight, the pain that had colored every family interaction and kept me awake countless nights, was nothing more than petty resentment, something small and mean-spirited that I was clutching onto out of spite rather than legitimate emotional injury. As if my pain was nothing more than an inconvenience they had to carefully manage and work around, like a difficult seating arrangement at a dinner party or an unexpected weather problem that required minor adjustments to outdoor plans. "I'm not trying to ruin anything for anyone," I said as quietly and calmly as I could manage, though my hands were shaking visibly at my sides and I could feel my voice threatening to crack under the weight of emotion I was struggling to contain. "I'm just not going to the wedding. That's my decision, and it's final." My father's face turned an even deeper shade of red, that vein in his temple pulsing more prominently now, his entire body seeming to radiate anger and frustration that I wasn't falling in line with their expectations and demands. "You're being incredibly selfish right now, Erica," he said, his voice rising in volume and taking on that sharp edge I'd learned to recognize as a precursor to real anger. "Do you have any idea how this is going to look to everyone we know? What are we supposed to tell people when they ask where you are? How are we supposed to explain to our friends and extended family that you couldn't be bothered to show up for your own sister's wedding? Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is for us?" "Tell them the truth," I said, my voice growing sharper despite my best efforts to maintain my composure and stay calm. "Tell them I had other plans that I couldn't change. Tell them I had a prior commitment that took precedence. Tell them whatever you want, but I'm not going to be there." My mother's face twisted into something cold and hard, something ugly that she usually kept carefully hidden beneath her polished, socially acceptable exterior, but that occasionally emerged during moments of real conflict or confrontation. "You're making this entire situation about you, just like you always do," she said, her words cutting and deliberate. Everything always has to be about Erica and her feelings and her problems and her needs. You can't just be happy for your sister for once in your life. You have to turn everything into some kind of drama and make yourself the center of attention, even when it's supposed to be someone else's special day. I wanted to scream at the top of my lungs until my throat was raw. I wanted to list every single time I'd shown up for them without question or complaint or expectation of reciprocation. Every birthday party where I'd arrived with thoughtfully chosen gifts and genuine enthusiasm. Every holiday gathering where I'd smiled and helped with cooking and cleaning and made conversation with relatives I barely knew. Every family dinner where I'd pretended everything was perfectly fine when it wasn't. Where I'd swallowed my hurt and maintained the facade of family harmony they seemed to value above all else. I wanted to remind them of every recital and graduation and celebration where I'd been there with bells on, where I'd cheered and clapped and acted like the supportive daughter and sister they always claimed they wanted me to be. I wanted to point out that I'd liked every single one of Brooke's engagement photos on social media, that I'd sent congratulatory messages, that I'd listened patiently to endless discussions about wedding plans, that I'd done absolutely everything a good sister was supposed to do in this situation, despite the pain it caused me. I wanted to throw their hypocrisy right back in their faces, to make them see the profound unfairness of demanding my presence at Brooke's wedding while having skipped mine without apology or explanation. I wanted to force them to acknowledge the double standard they were applying, the way they expected me to rise above hurt, while they felt no obligation to acknowledge the hurt they'd caused. But I didn't say any of that. I just looked at them. These people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, who were supposed to support me and celebrate my happiness and show up for my important moments, and felt a deep, aching sadness settle into my chest, like a heavy stone that would never fully dissolve. "I'm not going," I said one final time, my voice firm and clear and leaving no room for further negotiation or discussion. "That's my final answer, and nothing you say is going to change it." Then I turned on my heel and walked out of their house with my head held high and my shoulders back, leaving them standing there in their perfectly decorated living room in stunned, furious silence, probably already beginning to construct the narrative they would tell others about their difficult, jealous, unreasonable daughter who couldn't be happy for her sister. The drive home felt longer than usual, as if the distance between their house and mine had somehow stretched and expanded, or perhaps as if time itself had slowed down to allow me to fully process everything that had just transpired. My hands shook on the steering wheel as I replayed every word of the conversation in my head over and over again, analyzing and reanalyzing every exchange, every accusation, every dismissal of my legitimate feelings. Jealous, selfish, grudge, drama, making it about me. Their words echoed in my mind like a terrible song I couldn't stop hearing, each one a small knife, twisting deeper into wounds that had never been given the chance to properly heal. Each accusation felt designed to make me doubt myself, to make me question whether my hurt was legitimate or whether I was indeed being unreasonable and petty, like they insisted. When I finally pulled into the driveway of the modest house Owen and I had purchased together 2 years ago and walked through our front door, Owen was in the kitchen making dinner. The smell of garlic and herbs and something wonderful filled our home, and I could hear him humming along to the music playing softly from his phone speaker, completely unaware of the emotional storm I'd just weathered. He looked up the moment I walked in, and his face immediately softened with concern when he saw my expression. Owen had always possessed this remarkable ability to read my emotional state instantly, to see past whatever facade I might be maintaining to the truth underneath. "How did it go?" he asked gently, setting down the wooden spoon he'd been using to stir something aromatic on the stove. I shook my head slowly, unable to find the right words at first, my throat tight with emotion I was struggling to contain. "About as well as I expected it to go," I finally managed. Actually, maybe even worse than I expected. He wiped his hands carefully on a kitchen towel and walked over to me, pulling me into a warm, solid hug without saying another word, without asking for details or explanations, just offering the comfort of his presence and his unconditional support. I let myself sink completely into his warmth and his steady presence, so profoundly grateful for this man who had never once made me feel like my feelings were too much or unreasonable or invalid. "They don't get it," I whispered against his chest, my voice muffled by his shirt. "They really truly don't see what they did to me. They don't understand why I'm hurt. They think I'm just being jealous of Brooke and trying to ruin her special day out of spite." "I know," he said softly, one hand rubbing slow, comforting circles on my back in a gesture that had become familiar and soothing over our years together. "But you don't owe them anything, Erica. You don't have to go to this wedding if you don't want to. You don't have to pretend everything is fine when it's not. You don't have to sacrifice your own emotional well-being to maintain their comfortable fiction about what kind of family you are." I pulled back slightly so I could look up at his face, seeing the genuine concern and support reflected in his eyes. "They called me jealous of Brooke," I said, still processing the accusation. "They said I'm trying to ruin her special day on purpose. My mom said I always make everything about myself, that I can't just be happy for my sister for once." His jaw tightened visibly, and I saw genuine anger flash in his eyes. Not anger at me, but anger on my behalf, protective fury at the way my family had treated me. "They actually said that to you?" he asked, his voice tight with barely restrained indignation. "After everything they did, after skipping your wedding without explanation or apology, they had the audacity to call you jealous?" I nodded miserably, fresh tears threatening to spill over despite my efforts to maintain composure. He shook his head in complete disbelief at their audacity and lack of self-awareness. "You're literally the least jealous person I know," he said firmly, his voice full of conviction. "You've been nothing but supportive of Brooke through this entire engagement, even after everything she did to you, even after they all treated you like you didn't matter. You've liked her posts, you've sent congratulatory messages, you've listened to your mom go on and on about wedding plans. You've done everything a good sister is supposed to do, and they still find a way to make you the villain in their story." That night, I lay in bed staring up at our ceiling in the darkness, completely unable to sleep despite my physical and emotional exhaustion. My mind kept circling back obsessively to my wedding day 8 months ago, to those empty chairs that had haunted me ever since, to the forced smiles I'd maintained throughout the entire ceremony and reception while my heart was breaking. I thought about how incredibly hard I'd tried to make everything absolutely perfect, how much genuine hope I'd carried in my heart that my family would show up and celebrate this milestone with me the way families are supposed to do. I'd chosen my wedding colors so carefully, soft blues and silvers that I thought my mom would absolutely love. I'd picked out flowers that included her favorites, selected a menu that featured all of my dad's preferred dishes, chosen a venue that was convenient and accessible for everyone. I'd done everything in my power to make them want to be there with me, to make my wedding an event they couldn't possibly want to miss, and they had deliberately chosen not to come. I thought about Brooke's face on that security footage, the way she'd laughed while reading my invitation, the casual cruelty with which she'd thrown it away and then called someone to mock me. I thought about how she'd never once acknowledged my wedding afterward, how she'd simply continued posting about her own perfect life as if mine didn't exist. The footage was still saved on my phone, backed up in multiple locations. I'd looked at it countless times over the past months, each viewing bringing fresh waves of hurt and anger. But now, lying there in the darkness with Owen sleeping peacefully beside me, I realized exactly what I was going to do with that footage. The next morning, my phone buzzed insistently with a text message from my mom. I stared at the screen for a long moment before I could bring myself to open it and read what she had to say. We need to talk seriously about your attitude, Erica. Your father and I are very disappointed in your behavior yesterday. Please reconsider attending the wedding. Brooke deserves better than this from her own sister. Family is everything. Don't throw that away over nothing. Over nothing. That's what my wedding was to them. My marriage, my happiness, my pain, all of it added up to absolutely nothing in their eyes. My feelings, my hurt, my legitimate grievances were reduced to nothing that I should simply get over for the sake of family harmony and Brooke's perfect day. I stared at that message for what felt like hours, my thumb hovering uncertainly over the keyboard as I tried to decide how to respond. Part of me desperately wanted to type out everything I was feeling in painful detail, to tell her exactly why I wasn't going to that wedding and force her to understand the true depth of what they'd all done to me. I wanted to send her screenshots of my wedding photos showing those devastatingly empty chairs on my side of the aisle. I wanted to ask her directly how she would have felt if I'd skipped her own wedding all those years ago when she married my father. I wanted to make her feel even just a tiny fraction of the pain I'd been carrying around like a weight for 8 solid months. But I knew with absolute certainty that it wouldn't matter at all. They'd already decided I was the villain in their version of this story. No amount of explanation or evidence or emotional honesty would ever change their minds about that fundamental fact. They'd find a way to twist anything I said, to make me the unreasonable one, to paint themselves as the victims of my unreasonable grudge. Instead of pouring out my heart in a message they would dismiss or misinterpret, I typed a simple, clear reply. I'm not coming to the wedding, but I'll send something special for the reception. My mom's response came back almost immediately, as if she'd been sitting there waiting for my reply. What does that mean? I didn't answer her question. I just set my phone down on the kitchen counter and opened my laptop with steady hands, pulling up that saved security footage I'd been keeping for exactly this moment. I watched it one more time, my sister's cruel, delighted laughter filling the quiet morning air in my apartment, her mocking words about how I didn't deserve a real wedding echoing in my ears. Then I opened my video editing software and got to work with careful precision. I didn't need anything fancy or complicated, just a simple, clear clip that would be absolutely undeniable to anyone who watched it. I trimmed the footage carefully to start right at the moment when Brooke picked up my invitation and to end right after she threw it away and made that mocking phone call to her friend. The entire clip was less than 2 minutes long, but it was completely devastating in its crystal clarity. There was no room for misinterpretation or excuses. The video showed exactly what had happened in Brooke's own words and actions, with perfect audio and video quality thanks to my parents' expensive security system. I added a simple title screen at the very beginning with plain white text on a black background that said, "To my family, with love." Then I exported the file in the highest quality possible and saved it with the most neutral name I could think of, Wedding Message from Erica. When I was finally done, I sat back in my chair and just stared at the screen for a long time. My heart was pounding so hard in my chest I could hear it in my ears, feel it reverberating through my entire body. This wild mix of genuine fear and pure exhilaration was coursing through me, making my hands shake and my breath come faster. This was it. This was the exact moment I stopped passively swallowing my pain and started actively demanding that they see it, that they acknowledge it, that they face what they'd done. This was the moment I stopped being the accommodating daughter who quietly accepted whatever treatment they chose to dish out and became someone who would no longer accept their dismissal of my legitimate hurt. The next day, I called the venue where Brooke's reception was being held. I knew the place reasonably well because I'd actually worked with them several times through my job at Bright Fen Wealth. We'd hosted corporate events there, retirement parties, anniversary celebrations. The venue was absolutely beautiful, with soaring high ceilings and elegant crystal chandeliers and floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked a meticulously maintained garden. The kind of place that made every single event feel special and important and memorable. I'd worked directly with their events coordinator, a woman named Jenna Martinez, on multiple occasions over the years. She was efficient and professional, always going above and beyond to make sure everything ran smoothly for her clients. More importantly, for my current purposes, she trusted me because of our established working relationship and my reputation in Louisville's event planning community. "Hey, Jenna, it's Erica Morrison," I said when she answered, carefully keeping my voice light and friendly and professional. "Erica, how are you?" she responded warmly. "I heard your sister's getting married this weekend at our venue. That's so exciting. Small world, right?" I forced a bright smile into my voice, even though she obviously couldn't see me through the phone. "Yeah, it's going to be a really big event. Actually, that's exactly why I'm calling. I wanted to send over a special video message to be played during the reception. It's a surprise for the family, something really meaningful I want to share with everyone." "Oh, that's so incredibly sweet," Jenna said enthusiastically. "Of course, we can absolutely do that. Just send it over and I'll make sure the AV team has it ready to go. When would you like it played?" "During the toasts would be absolutely perfect," I said, my heart racing as I committed to this plan. "Maybe right after the maid of honor speaks? I think that would be the best timing for maximum impact." "Sounds good to me," Jenna agreed readily. "Just email it to me this afternoon and I'll coordinate everything with the DJ and the AV tech. We'll make sure it's a complete surprise for your family." "Perfect," I said, relief flooding through my entire body. "And Jenna, this is really important to me. My parents don't know about it, so if they happen to ask about any videos or special presentations, can you just say it's a surprise message from me? Don't tell them what's actually in it or give them any details." "Absolutely," she said warmly, completely unsuspecting of what she was agreeing to facilitate. "I love a good surprise. It's so thoughtful of you to do this even though you can't be there in person." "Thank you so much," I said, genuine gratitude in my voice despite the deception involved. "I really appreciate your help with this." "No problem at all," she responded cheerfully. "And hey, it was great hearing from you. We should grab coffee sometime soon and catch up properly. It's been too long since we've had a chance to really talk." "Definitely," I said, even though I knew with certainty that I'd probably never talk to her again after this weekend. After the video played and the inevitable fallout occurred, my reputation in Louisville's event planning circles might be completely destroyed, but I was past caring about that. Some things were more important than professional networking. When I hung up, I sat back in my chair and took a deep, steadying breath. This was really happening. There was absolutely no turning back now. I had just set in motion something that would change my family forever, something that couldn't be undone or taken back once that video played in front of 200 guests at Brooke's wedding reception. I sent the video to Jenna that afternoon with a carefully worded email explaining that it was a personal message for my sister's wedding reception, to be played during the toasts as a special surprise. I emphasized again that my family didn't know about it and that I wanted it to be a meaningful, memorable moment. Jenna responded within an hour with a cheerful confirmation, completely unaware of what she was about to unleash on that reception. She assured me that the video would be played exactly when I'd requested, that the AV team would have it queued up and ready to go, and that it would be a wonderful surprise for everyone in attendance. That night, I couldn't sleep at all. I lay awake in the darkness staring at the ceiling while Owen slept peacefully beside me, kept imagining the moment the video would play. I pictured the screen lighting up with footage of Brooke throwing away my invitation like trash. I envisioned my parents' faces draining of all color as they realized what they were watching. I imagined Brooke's expression shifting from pure joy to absolute horror as her cruelty was displayed for all her wedding guests to see. I heard in my mind the confused murmurs that would ripple through the crowd of 200 guests as they processed what they were witnessing. Part of me felt genuinely guilty for what I was about to do. This was Brooke's wedding day, supposedly the happiest day of her life, and I was about to turn it into something else entirely. Part of me felt terrified of the inevitable consequences, the anger, the accusations, the permanent damage to family relationships that were already strained nearly to breaking. But a much bigger part of me felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time: real, genuine power. For 8 months, I'd been completely powerless in this situation. I'd been the victim of their cruelty, the forgotten daughter, the sister whose feelings didn't matter even a little bit. I'd been the afterthought in their perfect family narrative, the one they could ignore without any real consequence or guilt. I'd swallowed my hurt and maintained appearances and tried to be understanding and reasonable, while they dismissed my pain as nothing. But now, finally, I was taking control. I was forcing them to see what they'd done, whether they wanted to or not. I was making sure that the truth came out, that their comfortable fiction about what kind of family we were would be shattered in front of everyone who mattered to them. Owen found me sitting on the edge of our bed at 2 a.m, staring at the wall, my mind racing with thoughts I couldn't quiet or control. "Can't sleep?" he asked gently, sitting down beside me and putting his arm around my shoulders. I shook my head, unable to find words for the complex mix of emotions churning inside me. "I keep thinking about what's going to happen," I finally said. "I keep imagining their faces when they see it. I keep wondering if I'm doing the right thing or if I'm just being vindictive and cruel like they said." "Are you having second thoughts about this?" he asked carefully, his tone making it clear that he would support whatever decision I made. I thought about it for a long moment, really considered backing out completely. I could call Jenna first thing in the morning, tell her there had been a terrible mistake, ask her to delete the video before anyone saw it. I could show up at the wedding and pretend everything was perfectly fine, smile through the ceremony and the reception like the good daughter and sister they wanted me to be. But then I thought about my wedding day. I thought about those empty chairs and the pitying looks from Owen's family and the photographer's gentle attempts to work around the obvious absence of my relatives. I thought about Brooke's cruel laughter as she threw my invitation away, her casual dismissal of my happiness, her statement that I didn't deserve a real wedding. I thought about my parents' complete dismissal of my pain, their absolute refusal to even acknowledge what they'd done, their insistence that I was being unreasonable and jealous for being hurt by their absence. I shook my head again, more firmly this time, my resolve strengthening. "No," I said clearly. "I need to do this. I need them to see what they did. I need everyone to see the truth instead of the fiction they've been maintaining." He took my hand and squeezed it gently, his support unwavering. "Then we'll get through it together," he said firmly. "No matter what happens, no matter how bad the fallout gets, I'm here. You're not alone in this, and you never will be." I looked at him. This man who had stood by me through absolutely everything, who had held me when I cried about my family's absence at our wedding, who had never once made me feel like my pain was an overreaction or that I should just get over it for the sake of keeping the peace. I felt a surge of gratitude so strong it brought fresh tears to my eyes. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for believing me. Thank you for supporting me even when what I'm doing might seem crazy or vindictive." "Always," he said, kissing my forehead tenderly. "Now try to get some sleep. Saturday is going to be a very long day, and you need to be rested for whatever comes next." But sleep didn't come at all. I lay awake until the sun started to rise, my mind spinning with anticipation and dread, and a strange sense of calm certainty that I was doing exactly what needed to be done. The morning of Brooke's wedding, I woke up with a strange sense of calm settling over me like a blanket. The anxiety and fear from the previous night had somehow faded during those sleepless hours, replaced by a quiet determination and a sense of rightness about what was about to happen. I made myself a proper breakfast for the first time in weeks, scrambled eggs, toast, fresh fruit, actually tasting the food instead of just mechanically consuming it. I went for a long run through our neighborhood, letting the physical exertion clear my mind and center my thoughts. I spent the afternoon reading a book on the porch while Owen worked in his home office, genuinely absorbed in the story rather than constantly checking my phone or obsessing over what was coming. Around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the time I knew the ceremony was starting at the Seelbach Hotel, I thought about Brooke walking down the aisle in her expensive white dress that my parents had paid for without question. I imagined my parents beaming with pride in the front row, my dad probably tearing up as he watched his youngest daughter get married, my mom dabbing at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. I wondered if they were thinking about me at all, or if they'd already written me off as the jealous, difficult sister who couldn't handle her siblings' happiness. I wondered if anyone at the ceremony had asked where I was and what explanation my parents had offered for my conspicuous absence. I checked my phone obsessively, even though I knew nothing would happen until the reception started. The ceremony would last about 30 minutes, I estimated. Then there would be a cocktail hour while the wedding party took elaborate photos in the hotel's gardens and elegant interior spaces. The reception would start around 6, with dinner served shortly after. The toasts typically happened around 7:30 or 8, once everyone had eaten and the champagne was flowing freely and people were relaxed and happy. That's when my video would play. By 6 o'clock in the evening, I was pacing around our living room, completely unable to sit still or focus on anything. Owen suggested we watch a movie to distract me, but I couldn't concentrate on anything beyond what was happening at that hotel ballroom across town. At 6:15, my phone buzzed with a text from Kelsey, my best friend, who I'd begged to attend the wedding as my eyes and ears. She'd been reluctant at first, uncomfortable with the idea of attending under false pretenses, but she'd ultimately agreed because she understood how much I needed to know what happened when the video played. "Are you watching this somehow?" her text read. "Because holy crap, Erica, holy crap." My heart immediately started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. "What's happening?" I texted back with shaking hands, my fingers fumbling over the keys. "Your video just played," she responded. "Everyone is losing it. Your parents look like they've seen a ghost. Brooke is crying, not happy tears. Tyler looks confused and angry. People are whispering and pointing. This is absolutely insane. I can't believe you actually did this." I stared at the screen, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. It had worked. The video had actually played exactly as planned, and now the truth was finally out there for everyone to see. My family's carefully maintained facade had been shattered in front of 200 of their closest friends and relatives. My phone exploded with notifications almost immediately after Kelsey's text. Texts, calls, voicemails, all coming in rapid succession like fireworks. My parents, Brooke, various aunts and uncles and cousins, even people I barely knew who had apparently been at the wedding. The notifications kept coming, one after another, filling my screen with names and preview text that I couldn't fully read before the next one arrived. I didn't answer any of them. I just sat there on the couch, watching the screen light up over and over again, feeling a complex mix of satisfaction and guilt and relief and terror wash over me in waves. Owen leaned over and looked at the messages accumulating on my phone screen. "Your mom's calling," he observed quietly. "Your dad's calling. Even Brooke is trying to reach you." "I know," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Are you going to answer?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. I shook my head firmly, setting the phone face down on the coffee table, so I couldn't see the screen lighting up with each new notification. "Not yet," I said. "Let them sit with it for a while. Let them feel even a fraction of what I felt when they all skipped my wedding. Let them experience what it's like when someone you love disappoints you profoundly and then has to face the consequences of their actions." We sat in silence for a long time, the weight of what I'd done settling over both of us like a heavy blanket. I'd just blown up my family's perfect narrative in front of everyone they knew, in front of their friends and colleagues, and extended family and social circle. There would be consequences. There would be anger and hurt, and probably years of estrangement. Relationships that were already strained might be permanently severed. But as I sat there processing everything that had just happened, I realized something profound that made my chest feel lighter than it had in months. I didn't feel guilty. Despite everything, despite the magnitude of what I'd done and the pain it would cause, I didn't feel the crushing weight of guilt I'd expected. I didn't feel scared of the consequences. Instead, I felt free. For the first time in 8 months, I felt like I'd reclaimed some measure of control over my own narrative. I'd refused to let them dismiss my pain any longer. I'd forced them to see the truth about what they'd done, and now everyone else could see it too. Around 8 o'clock that evening, there was a loud, aggressive knock on our front door that made both Owen and me jump. I froze on the couch, my heart suddenly pounding again, all the calm I'd felt earlier evaporating instantly. Owen gave me a questioning look, silently asking if I wanted him to answer or if I wanted to pretend we weren't home. "Should I answer it?" he asked quietly. I nodded slowly, my heart pounding, steeling myself for whatever was coming. I knew who it would be before Owen even looked through the peephole. He walked to the door and checked, then turned back to me with a grim expression that confirmed my suspicions. "It's your dad," he said, "and he looks really angry." I took a deep breath and stood up, squaring my shoulders and preparing myself for the confrontation I'd known was inevitable. "Let him in," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded despite the anxiety coursing through me. Owen opened the door, and my dad stood there on our porch, his face red and twisted with rage, his entire body radiating fury. He didn't wait for an invitation or greeting before he started shouting. "What the hell were you thinking?" he yelled immediately, his voice so loud I was certain our neighbors could hear every word. "Do you have any idea what you just did? Do you have any concept of how you just humiliated your sister in front of everyone we know?" I crossed my arms over my chest, forcing myself to stay calm and centered despite his obvious rage, refusing to let him intimidate me the way he had so many times throughout my childhood. "I told the truth," I said firmly, keeping my voice level and clear. "That's all I did. I showed people exactly what happened." "You humiliated your sister," he shouted again, his face getting even redder. "You ruined her wedding, her special day that she's been planning for months. You deliberately sabotaged the most important day of her life out of pure spite and jealousy." "No," I said, my voice growing stronger as I found my footing in this confrontation. "Brooke ruined my wedding. She threw away my invitation while laughing about how I didn't deserve happiness. You and Mom and everyone else in this family chose not to show up for my wedding without explanation or apology. I just made sure everyone knew about it. I just made sure the truth came out instead of letting you all continue pretending it never happened." My dad's hands clenched into fists at his sides, and for a moment I wondered if he might actually try to hit me. Owen must have had the same thought because he moved slightly closer to me, positioning himself protectively. "That video was 8 months old," my dad shouted, as if the passage of time somehow negated what it showed. "You've been holding on to that this whole time, just waiting for the perfect moment to strike, planning your revenge like some kind of vindictive—" "I wasn't trying to hurt her," I interrupted, my voice rising to match his volume. "I was trying to show you what she did to me. I was trying to make you see why I was hurt, why I couldn't just smile and pretend everything was fine and show up to celebrate her wedding like nothing had happened. I was trying to make you acknowledge what you all did to me." "We didn't do anything to you," he yelled, and the absolute conviction in his voice, the genuine belief that they bore no responsibility for my pain, hit me like a physical blow. "So we missed your wedding. So what? People miss things sometimes. Life happens. You're acting like we committed some unforgivable sin when all we did was miss one event. You're being completely unreasonable and overdramatic about the whole thing." His words, "So what?" echoed in my ears, confirming everything I'd suspected about how little my wedding had meant to them. After everything, he still didn't get it. He still couldn't or wouldn't see why their absence had hurt me so deeply, why it mattered that my entire family had chosen not to show up for the most important day of my life. "Get out," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the emotions roiling inside me. He blinked, clearly not expecting that response. "What?" he said, temporarily taken aback. "Get out of my house," I repeated, louder this time and more firmly. "If you can't see why what you did was wrong, if you can't acknowledge that skipping my wedding without explanation or apology was hurtful and wrong, then I don't want you here. I don't want to hear any more excuses or justifications or dismissals of my legitimate feelings." His face turned an even deeper shade of red, that vein in his temple pulsing so prominently I briefly worried he might have a stroke right there on my porch. "You're going to regret this, Erica," he said, his voice dropping to a menacing tone that was somehow more frightening than his shouting had been. "You're going to lose your whole family over this. Your mother and I, your sister, your aunts and uncles and cousins, everyone is going to know what you did, and they're all going to turn their backs on you. You're going to end up completely alone, and it will be entirely your own fault." "Maybe," I said steadily, meeting his eyes without flinching. "But at least I'll have my dignity. At least I'll know I stood up for myself and refused to let you all continue dismissing my pain. At least I'll know I told the truth instead of maintaining your comfortable lies." He stared at me for a long moment, his expression cycling through rage and disbelief and something that might have been grudging respect if I didn't know him better. Then he turned on his heel and stormed out, slamming our front door so hard that a picture frame rattled on the nearby wall. I stood there trembling as Owen wrapped his arms around me, holding me steady as the adrenaline that had been sustaining me through the confrontation began to fade. "You okay?" he asked softly, his voice full of concern. I nodded against his chest, surprised to find that I actually meant it. "I think so," I said. "I think I'm actually okay." Over the next few days, the fallout from the video continued to unfold in waves. My mom sent a long, angry email accusing me of being vindictive and cruel, of deliberately trying to destroy Brooke's happiness, of being unable to handle anyone else in the family receiving attention or celebration. She wrote paragraphs about how disappointed she was in me, how she'd raised me better than this, how I'd embarrassed the entire family with my petty revenge. Brooke left a tearful voicemail calling me a horrible sister, saying she'd never forgive me for what I'd done, that I'd ruined the happiest day of her life out of pure jealousy and spite. She said she'd always known I resented her, but she'd never imagined I could be cruel enough to actually sabotage her wedding. She said she never wanted to see or speak to me again, that as far as she was concerned, she no longer had a sister. Even extended family members reached out, most of them siding with my parents and Brooke, sending messages ranging from disappointed to outright hostile. My Aunt Caroline wrote that I should be ashamed of myself. My Uncle Robert said I'd always been the difficult one in the family. My cousin Jennifer said she couldn't believe I'd stooped so low. But there were a few, not many, but a few, who didn't immediately condemn me. My cousin Fiona called to say she understood why I'd done it, that she'd actually been at my wedding and had noticed the empty chairs on my side, had wondered at the time what had happened, but hadn't wanted to pry. She said she'd been shocked when she learned my family had deliberately chosen not to attend, and while she thought the video at Brooke's wedding was extreme, she understood the pain that had driven me to that point. Kelsey, my best friend who had witnessed the video playing at the reception, stopped by our house with wine and takeout food, letting me vent and cry and process everything that had happened. She told me about the reactions she'd observed at the reception, the shocked gasps when the video started playing, the uncomfortable shifting in seats as people realized what they were watching, the way conversations had erupted immediately afterward with people debating whether I'd been justified or had gone too far. Owen's family reached out to remind me I was loved and supported, that they considered me part of their family regardless of what my biological family chose to do. His mother called to say she was proud of me for standing up for myself, that she'd been horrified when she learned my family had skipped our wedding, and that she thought they deserved to face the consequences of their actions. The thing that surprised me most was the number of people from the wedding reception who reached out privately to say they'd had no idea what my family had done to me. Several of my parents' friends sent messages expressing shock and disappointment in them, saying they'd always thought my parents were good people. But this revelation had changed their perception entirely. Some people apologized for not being at my wedding, explaining that they hadn't been invited or hadn't known about it, saying they would have absolutely attended if they'd known. Others said they'd lost respect for my parents after seeing the video, that they couldn't imagine treating their own children with such blatant favoritism and disregard. It wasn't universal condemnation of my family by any means. It was complicated and nuanced, with people on both sides of the issue. Some understood why I'd done what I did and thought my family had it coming. Others thought I'd gone too far, that there were better ways to handle family conflict than public humiliation. Some tried to stay neutral, saying they understood both perspectives and hoping the family could eventually reconcile. But at least now, they all knew the truth. At least now, my family couldn't maintain their fiction about what kind of people they were, couldn't pretend they'd done nothing wrong, couldn't dismiss my pain as jealousy or overreaction when 200 people had seen the evidence with their own eyes. 2 weeks after the wedding, I got a text from Brooke that I never expected to receive. "Can we talk?" I stared at it for a long time, my finger hovering over the delete button. Part of me wanted to ignore her completely, to give her a taste of the silence and dismissal I'd experienced from her. Part of me was curious about what she possibly had to say after leaving that angry voicemail calling me a horrible sister. I texted back after several minutes of internal debate. "Fine. Coffee tomorrow at 10 a.m., the cafe on Bardstown Road." The next morning, I sat in a small corner cafe waiting, my stomach in knots despite my attempts to stay calm. When Brooke walked in, she looked different. Smaller, somehow, diminished. Her eyes were red and puffy, her face bare of the makeup she usually wore so carefully. She was dressed casually in jeans and a sweatshirt, rather than her typical stylish outfits. She looked, for the first time I could remember, genuinely vulnerable. She sat down across from me without speaking at first, just looking at her hands folded on the table between us. "Why did you do it?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because you never apologized," I said simply, keeping my tone neutral. "You threw away my invitation and mocked me to your friend. You said I didn't deserve a real wedding. And then you never acknowledged it, never said you were sorry, never admitted you'd done anything wrong." Tears filled her eyes and began spilling down her cheeks. "I know," she said, her voice breaking. "I know I was awful to you. I was jealous." I blinked in surprise. Of all the things I'd expected her to say, that wasn't one of them. "Jealous?" I repeated. "Jealous of what?" "Of you," she said, looking up at me with red, swollen eyes. "You've always had your life together. You have a career you're good at, a husband who adores you, this sense of purpose and direction. When you got engaged to Owen, it felt like you were moving even further ahead, leaving me behind in your dust. I was still working part-time at a boutique, still living in an apartment Mom and Dad helped pay for, still figuring out what I wanted to do with my life. And there you were, getting married and buying a house and building this adult life that seemed so perfect and complete." Part of me wanted to feel sympathy for her, to understand that her cruelty had come from a place of insecurity rather than pure malice. But I was still too angry, still too hurt by what she'd done, and by the 8 months of pain that had followed. "That doesn't excuse what you did," I said firmly. "Being jealous doesn't justify throwing away my invitation and laughing about how I didn't deserve happiness. It doesn't justify convincing Mom and Dad not to come to my wedding. It doesn't justify any of it." "I know," she said again, more tears falling. "I'm not making excuses. I'm not trying to justify what I did or make you forgive me. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry. I'm genuinely, truly sorry for what I did to you. I was cruel and petty, and I hurt you deliberately, and I've been living with the guilt of that ever since your wedding. Seeing that video play at my reception, seeing my own cruelty displayed for everyone to see, made me realize how terrible I'd been. I deserved what you did. I deserved to be humiliated the way I humiliated you. I looked at her across the table, studying her face for signs of manipulation or insincerity, but all I saw was genuine remorse and pain. Something shifted inside me. Not forgiveness yet, not trust, but a small crack in the wall of anger I'd built around my heart. "Thank you," I said quietly. "I appreciate you saying that. I appreciate you acknowledging what you did instead of just making excuses or blaming me for overreacting." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of everything that had happened hanging between us like a physical presence. "Tyler and I are having problems," Brooke said suddenly, her voice small. "The video, it caused a rift he can't seem to get past. He keeps asking me if I'm really the kind of person who would do something that cruel to her own sister. He keeps looking at me differently, like he's not sure he knows who I really am. I think we might separate." Part of me felt bad hearing that her marriage was struggling. Part of me thought it was fitting that her cruelty had consequences that extended beyond just our relationship. Actions have consequences, and sometimes those consequences are painful and lasting. "I'm sorry your marriage is struggling," I said, and I meant it despite everything. "But that's between you and Tyler. That's not something I can fix or take responsibility for." She nodded, wiping at her eyes with a napkin. "I know, I'm not asking you to fix it or feel responsible. I just wanted you to know. I wanted you to understand that what you did had an impact, that it wasn't just some dramatic gesture that everyone forgot about the next day." "I never thought it would be forgotten," I said. "Honestly, I knew exactly what I was doing when I sent that video. I knew it would have consequences for all of us." Brooke stood up slowly, gathering her purse and jacket. "I hope one day we can be close again," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I hope one day you can forgive me and we can rebuild some kind of relationship. But I understand if that never happens. I understand if you can't get past what I did. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry and that I recognize I was wrong. Maybe," I said carefully, "maybe someday we can rebuild something. But it's going to take time. A lot of time. And it's going to require more than just one apology. It's going to require you to show me through your actions that you've actually changed, that you're not just sorry you got caught, but genuinely sorry for what you did." She nodded, fresh tears streaming down her face. "I understand. Thank you for meeting with me. Thank you for listening." Then she left, and I sat alone at that cafe table for a long time, processing the conversation and the unexpected apology, and the complicated feelings swirling inside me. My parents never apologized, not in the weeks immediately following the wedding, not in the months that came after. They doubled down on their position, insisting I'd overreacted and gone too far, that I'd humiliated them and Brooke unnecessarily, that I was the one who owed them an apology rather than the other way around. They stopped inviting me to family gatherings, Sunday dinners, holiday celebrations, birthday parties. They stopped calling to check in or ask how I was doing. They stopped acknowledging me in any meaningful way, essentially cutting me out of the family as punishment for refusing to quietly accept their mistreatment. It hurt, but not as much as I thought it would. I'd spent so long trying desperately to earn their approval, to be the daughter they wanted me to be, to meet their expectations and make them proud. I'd twisted myself into knots trying to please them, trying to be good enough to warrant the same love and attention they gave Brooke so freely. Now I realized with startling clarity that I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their validation or their love if it came with conditions and double standards. I didn't need to be part of a family that treated me as less important, less worthy of consideration, less deserving of respect and support. I had Owen, whose love was unconditional and steady and real. I had Kelsey, who had proven herself to be more of a sister to me than Brooke had ever been. I had Owen's family, who had welcomed me with open arms and treated me like one of their own from the very beginning. I had a life I was proud of, a career that fulfilled me, a home that felt safe and welcoming. That was enough. More than enough, actually. I threw myself into work with renewed energy and focus, channeling all the emotional turmoil into professional achievement. 6 months after Brooke's wedding, I earned a promotion to Senior Event Coordinator at Brightfen Wealth, a position that came with increased responsibility and significantly better compensation. My boss, Margaret, called me into her office to deliver the news personally. "Erica, I've been consistently impressed with your work over the past year," she said, smiling warmly. "You've handled some of our most challenging events with grace and professionalism. Your attention to detail is impeccable. Your client relationships are strong, and you have this remarkable ability to anticipate problems before they arise. I'd like to promote you to Senior Event Coordinator, effective immediately." I felt a surge of pride and accomplishment that had nothing to do with my family or their approval. This was something I'd earned entirely on my own merit, through my own hard work and dedication and skill. "Thank you," I said, genuine gratitude in my voice. "I really appreciate the opportunity and the confidence you're showing in me." "You've more than earned it," Margaret said. "And between you and me, I heard about what happened with your family. I just want you to know that I think you handled an incredibly difficult situation with remarkable strength. Not everyone would have had the courage to stand up for themselves the way you did." I was surprised she'd heard about it, though I probably shouldn't have been. Louisville is a relatively small city in many ways, and news travels fast in professional circles. "Thank you," I said again. "That means a lot to hear." Owen and I started talking seriously about buying a house, about maybe starting a family of our own someday. We spent weekends driving around neighborhoods, attending open houses, imagining what our future might look like in different spaces. We talked about children and whether we wanted them, about what kind of parents we wanted to be, about the kind of family we wanted to create together. Life moved forward in positive ways, and I felt lighter than I had in years. The weight of trying to please my family, of constantly seeking approval that never came, of making myself smaller to accommodate their favoritism. All of it had lifted, leaving me feeling free and unburdened in a way I'd never experienced before. One evening, about a year after the wedding video incident, I was cleaning out my email inbox and found the original video file I'd sent to Jenna at the venue. I stared at it for a long time, remembering the anger and hurt that had driven me to create it, remembering the fear and exhilaration I'd felt when I'd sent it, remembering the moment when everything had changed. Owen found me at the computer, staring at the screen with an unreadable expression. "What are you looking at?" he asked gently, sitting down beside me. "The video," I said quietly. "The one I sent to the venue. The one that changed everything." He looked at the screen, then at me, his expression thoughtful and concerned. "Do you regret it?" he asked carefully. I thought for a long moment, really examining my feelings honestly. "No," I said finally. "I don't regret it. But I'm ready to move on. I'm ready to stop defining myself by what they did to me and start focusing on building the life I want, instead of reacting to the life they tried to force me into." He smiled and kissed my forehead gently. "Then move on," he said simply. "Delete it if you want to. Keep it if you need to. But don't let it hold you back from the future you deserve." I looked at the file one more time, then moved my cursor to the delete button and clicked it without hesitation. A confirmation dialog appeared asking if I was sure, and I clicked yes immediately. It was time to focus on the future, on the people who actually cared about me and valued me, on building a life that brought me joy rather than pain. A few months later, I got a letter in the mail from my mom. Not an email or a text, but an actual handwritten letter on her good stationery, the kind she usually reserved for thank you notes and formal correspondence. "Dear Erica," it began in her familiar handwriting. "Your father and I have been doing a lot of thinking over the past year. We've been in therapy, both individually and together, trying to understand where things went so wrong with our family. We realize now that we didn't handle things well after your wedding. We should have been there for you on your special day, and we're sorry we weren't. We should have acknowledged how much our absence hurt you, instead of dismissing your feelings and making excuses. We should have treated you with the same consideration and enthusiasm we showed Brooke. We hope that one day, if you're willing, we can work toward rebuilding our relationship. We understand if you're not ready for that yet, and we respect whatever decision you make. But we wanted you to know that we recognize we were wrong, and we're genuinely sorry for the pain we caused you. Love, Mom." I read the letter 3 times, examining every word for hidden meanings or qualifications. It wasn't the perfect apology I'd once imagined receiving. It was somewhat vague and non-committal in places, still not fully acknowledging the depth of what they'd done. But it was something. It was an admission of wrongdoing, an acknowledgement of my pain, an expression of regret. I showed the letter to Owen, unsure what to make of it or how to respond. "What are you going to do?" he asked, after reading it carefully. "I don't know yet," I said honestly. Part of me wants to respond immediately, to accept their apology and try to rebuild. But another part of me is still hurt and angry and not sure I can trust them not to hurt me again. He nodded, understanding. "Take your time," he said. "There's no rush to decide. Whatever you choose, whatever feels right to you, I support completely." I put the letter in a drawer in my desk, not ready to respond, but not ready to throw it away either. I needed time to process it, to figure out what I wanted and what I was willing to risk for the possibility of reconciliation. 2 years after the video incident, my family had changed in fundamental ways. My parents and I had begun the slow, painful process of rebuilding our relationship, though it looked nothing like what it had been before. We met for coffee occasionally, had careful conversations where we both tried not to say the wrong thing, slowly learned how to interact with each other in this new dynamic. My parents had continued therapy and had made genuine efforts to understand and acknowledge their favoritism toward Brooke. They'd admitted in one particularly emotional conversation that they'd always found it easier to relate to Brooke, that her struggles and needs had seemed more obvious and urgent than mine, that they'd taken my competence and independence for granted and assumed I didn't need their support the way she did. It wasn't a complete excuse, but it was an explanation that helped me understand their perspective, even if I didn't agree with their choices. Brooke and I remained distant. We exchanged occasional texts on birthdays and holidays, brief messages that were polite, but not particularly warm or personal. She divorced Tyler after about a year of marriage, the video and the revelation of her cruelty having created a rift they couldn't overcome. She'd moved to Nashville for a fresh start, taking a job at a marketing firm and apparently building a new life away from Louisville and all its complicated memories. Maybe someday we'd reconcile more fully and rebuild some kind of sisterly relationship. Maybe we'd never be close again. I'd made peace with both possibilities, accepting that some relationships are permanently damaged by betrayal, and that forcing reconciliation before both parties are truly ready often does more harm than good. As for me, I'd found genuine peace and happiness in my life. Owen and I had bought a beautiful house with a big backyard in a quiet neighborhood we both loved. We'd adopted a dog, a golden retriever named Charlie, who brought endless joy and laughter into our home. We were talking seriously about having children, about starting a family of our own and doing it differently than our parents had done, with intention and awareness and commitment to treating any children we might have with equal love and respect. Now, standing in our backyard on a beautiful spring evening, watching Owen play fetch with Charlie, I thought about everything that had happened over the past few years. The pain of being overlooked and dismissed by my family, the devastation of those empty chairs at my wedding, the anger that had driven me to send that video, the fallout and consequences that had followed, the slow, difficult process of healing and moving forward. My parents had lost years with me, had damaged their reputation in their social circle, had been forced to face uncomfortable truths about who they'd been and the choices they'd made. Brooke's marriage had ended partly because of the cruelty she'd shown me, partly because Tyler couldn't reconcile the woman he thought he'd married with the woman he'd seen on that video. They'd all paid a price for their actions and choices, but more importantly than any external consequences they'd faced, I thought about my own journey, how I'd gone from desperately seeking their approval to knowing my own worth independent of their validation, how I'd built a life filled with genuine love and support and respect, how I'd learned to set boundaries and stand up for myself, even when it meant losing relationships I'd once thought were essential to my happiness. The revenge, I realized, wasn't really about the video or the public humiliation or forcing them to face consequences. The real revenge was building a life so full and satisfying that their absence from it didn't diminish it. The real revenge was finding happiness and peace without them, proving that I didn't need their approval or their love to thrive and succeed and create meaning in my life. Looking back now with the clarity that time and distance provide, I understood that the video had been a turning point, a moment when I'd stopped accepting their treatment and started demanding better. It had cost me relationships and caused pain, both to them and to myself. It had created riffles that would probably never fully settle. But it had also given me something invaluable, the power to tell my truth, to refuse silence and dismissal, to demand acknowledgement of my pain. If I had to do it all over again, knowing everything I know now about the consequences and the fallout and the years of complicated feelings that would follow, I would still send that video. Because some truths need telling, even when they're ugly and uncomfortable. Because sometimes you have to burn down the old structures to build something better and healthier in their place. Because choosing yourself, even when it means losing others, is sometimes the most important choice you can make. As I stood in my backyard in the life I'd built, surrounded by people who genuinely loved and valued me, watching the evening light paint everything in shades of gold and amber, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: complete, genuine, unqualified peace. Not forced peace maintained through silence and swallowing hurt, not fragile peace that required constant vigilance and self-censorship, but real, deep, sustainable peace that came from living authentically, from being surrounded by people who truly saw and valued me, from knowing I had the strength to stand up for myself even when it cost me dearly. And that, I realized with a sense of profound gratitude and satisfaction, was the best revenge of all. Not hurting them, but healing myself. Not destroying their happiness, but building my own. Not making them pay for what they'd done, but refusing to let what they'd done define who I became. The empty chairs at my wedding would always be part of my story, a painful memory that shaped who I was and how I understood family and loyalty and love. But they were no longer the defining feature of my life, no longer the wound that colored everything else. I'd moved beyond them, beyond the pain they represented, beyond the desperate need for approval from people who had proven themselves incapable of giving it freely and unconditionally. I'd found my own path, built my own family, created my own definition of what love and support and showing up really meant. And in the end, that was worth more than any apology, any reconciliation, any restoration of the family I'd once known. I was free. And that freedom, hard-won and precious, was something no one could ever take away from me again.